All right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. Let's find our seats. We're going to go ahead and get started here. How's everybody feeling this morning? Alive, excited, and full of energy? Yeah. All right. You guys ready to do a little learning this morning? We are here this morning to talk about the fire disclosure requirements specific to real estate transactions. We've brought in some experts today. We've got a few gentlemen that I will announce here in just a moment, as well as somebody joining us on Zoom from the California Association of Realtors. So what we wanted to do today is bring value to our MetroList participants, our subscribers, the agent network here in the local market. So my name is Anthony James. I sit on the board of directors for CREB, which is the California Real Estate Brokers, Inc. CREB is 50% owners of MetroList. And as a board, we help guide decisions and directions and be the broker voice for MetroList. And so with me today, I want to acknowledge a few folks that are in the room here this morning with us. If you are a CREB board member, please just stand up real quick. We just want to acknowledge some of the folks that are with us today. Nobody in the audience, but they're all standing outside on the edges there. Good to see you guys. Let's give them a round of applause. We've got Bob Greenspan, who's the VP of Corporate Secretary for MetroList, John Hughes, who is the current CREB president. John is right over there. Also, Ben Herb. Where are you at, Ben? There he is, Ben Herb, right over here, who is our CREB staff liaison. And then Dave Howe, who is, of course, the president and CEO of MetroList. Let's give them a big round of applause. All right, I've got one little commercial plug. You guys ready for a commercial? All right, who likes MetroList? All of us should be saying, yeah, I love MetroList. We're all participants and subscribers to MetroList. We get all kinds of great information, resources, and tools. And I want to talk very quickly about a great tool that MetroList offers. I'm going to read it here. This is our plug for MetroList. Say good morning, MetroList. You guys right over here at the table. So MetroList offers complimentary agent websites as an integral part of your subscription package. MetroList.com real estate websites are feature-rich, including elements such as your agent profile, automatic listing alerts, interactive map search, and lead capture tools. To explore the MetroList.com benefits further, please visit our booth right over here after today's show. For those attending remotely via Zoom, you can kickstart your journey by visiting websupport.metrolist.com. Don't miss this opportunity to enhance your online presence and connect with potential clients, as these MetroList.com complimentary websites are designed to maximize your real estate experience. Who's fired up for some MetroList websites? All right. Let me get to our agenda here this morning. Okay. Who has had a client that was looking for a mountain-like property in the last couple of years, maybe for themselves or maybe for yourself, a cabin in Tahoe, in Truckee, some sort of mountain property? Who's done a real estate transaction in a mountain-like town in the last, I don't know, let's say year to 2 years? Handful of us, okay. And have you had insurance challenges? All right, just to say the least, we're going to talk about that here this morning. Have you had to have CAL FIRE maybe come out and do an inspection for defensible space or home hardening requirements, things of that nature? Raise your hands real quick, okay? All right, if you haven't, there's likely going to be a day when you have a client that is certainly going to want to transact in a mountain type town. And that's what today is all about, is to help get you prepared for that conversation. There's some nuances that are taking place in our industry, specifically the insurance piece. We're going to talk a lot about that here in just a moment. But let me go ahead and very quickly just introduce our guests here today. We wanted to bring in the panelists and the experts to help all of us here locally as we go out and engage buyers and sellers in the marketplace, understand how to handle some of these conversations specific to Form FHDS. Has anybody seen that form on Zip Forms? The Fire Hardening and Defensible Space Addendum and Disclosure. That thing is a trick. If you've read through it, the yes and no questions, trying to navigate that form, we have Jana Gardner, who is the legal counsel for California Association of Realtors. I don't know if she's going to pop on our screen. She's on Zoom, but she is going to actually be helping us answer some of the questions specific to Form FHDS and how to navigate that with a seller or a buyer today. Hey, there's Jana. Say hello, Jana. Oh, never mind. There she went. We're going to get our technical difficulties. She's down in Los Angeles joining us today. Let's see here. That's why I don't like paper, ladies and gentlemen. Where did my paper go? with all of my fun notes. All right, I don't need that one. Got this one. There it is right here. Okay. So Jana Gardner, again, ladies and gentlemen, she's the senior counsel for the California Association of Realtors. There she is. Say good morning, Jana. How are you?
Good morning, everyone. Glad to join
Look
today.
at this technology is working. This is awesome. So she's going to answer some questions specific to that form and how we can best position it and be a resource to our clients when it comes time to fill that disclosure out. And then also with us this morning is Scott Sanchez of Lewis Sanchez Insurance. Say good morning, Scott. How's your mic working today?
Good.
All right. So Scott, real quick, how long you been in the insurance business and what type of insurance are you guys writing today?
I've been in the business 15 years. I do all types of insurance, but specialize in hard to place stuff. So we'll go through all the FAIR plan and all that fun stuff today.
Okay, wonderful. And then also joined with us this morning is Randy Northrup from CAL FIRE. Randy is a battalion chief. Did I say that right?
Yes.
All right. And Randy, take a couple of seconds. How long you been with CAL FIRE and what is it that you do specifically for CAL FIRE today?
So I began my fire service career in 1998, started with CAL FIRE in 2001, and I'm currently a battalion chief in the office of the State Fire Marshal's office here in Sacramento, and working with the team to build our defensible space and home hardening program throughout the state.
Wonderful. Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you for joining us today. Okay, so we're going to kick things off with you this morning, Randy. Again, we kind of have a panel conversation today. There will be an opportunity for Q&A at the end of today's presentation, but we're going to walk through a conversation with each of our experts today to help us understand kind of the current landscape of what's happening with wildfire, the differences between defensible space and home hardening. We're going to talk specific to the insurance piece, and then at the very end, we will get to Jana from California Association of Realtors to answer some common questions around Form FHDS. But with that, we're going to give the floor to Randy for just a few minutes. He's going to walk us through a slide deck that'll take about 10 or 12 minutes to hopefully kind of set the stage for our conversation today. So Randy.
All right, thank you. Sorry, I have a lot of energy and I can't really sit down in one spot because I will put everybody to sleep. So why do we have defensible space? Raise a hand. Anybody been camping before? Anybody had a campfire? Okay. So when you first have that campfire, what happens? Everybody has their chairs really close, right? Because that fire is really little. It's not very hot, right? But then you get a guy in there or a person in the group, just like me, who likes things burning and has fun, and they add more and more firewood, right? And what happens with that flame? It gets bigger. So what does everybody do? They push their chairs back because it gets too darn hot, right? So essentially defensible space is the same thing. It's reducing those fuels around a structure to minimize that heat and hopefully prevent that house from catching on fire. Okay. So it's the buffer. It's creating that buffer between the wildland, the vegetation that can burn, and our structures. And this will either help slow the spread or hopefully even stop it in some cases. Okay. Why we're here, 4291 Public Resource Code 4291 is the law that outlines defensible space within the state. That has actually been in place since 1965. So it's been here for quite a while. Okay. Title 14 actually is the regulatory agency that outlines how we're going to come in compliance with that. Okay. So we have our house there, right? As in our example, we break that house into two zones, zone 1 and zone 2. Zone 1 is that edge of that house out 30 feet, and zone 2 is from that 30 feet out to the 100-foot mark. Okay. While you're in here, zone 2 will either go out 100 feet or to the edge of the property line, whichever one's closer. Okay. Obviously, the closer to that house, the more fuel reduction we want to do to keep that house safer. Okay. Now, some people may want to know, what's home hardening? What does home hardening sound like to you? Stucco, okay. Perfect. Okay. So in 2007, we had a little fire called the Cedar Fire in Southern California that burned, I don't know how many thousand, 5,000 homes or whatever. With that legislation came out, we started adapting what we call the Chapter 7A building codes, which is the building codes for structures being built in a wildland area. With that, we look at a number of different areas of how can we make that house more safe. So it's like the building components of the house to hopefully reduce the chances of that house catching on fire. Those includes the roof, the vents, windows, decking, that type of material. Okay. As you can see, we have a little bit more of a visual, so you can get this picture is exactly like a test plot burn that they did back east to figure out how to lower the chances of those homes surviving. Obviously, we identified some of those key areas, but the critical areas that portion closest to the structure. Okay. Anything light flammable, light flashy, easy to ignite, pine needles, leaves, that type of thing. When it's blown up against your house, it's easier for that house to catch fire. Okay. When we start that campfire, we start with little sticks, right? We don't start with the big log. So one of the questions is local ordinances. So Public Resource Code 4291 outlines the state law, right? But you can have counties or cities that adopt stricter rules within that. Okay, so that would be the local ordinance. So when they come out and do your inspection on your property, remember 4291 is the state requirement, but if you live in an area where they have adopted the rules, you're going to have to comply to whatever those local ordinances are. So the best way to check with that is your local county or your local fire department. Remember, the ordinance must meet or exceed the state standard. So why are we here today? Any volunteers want to answer that? Okay. We're here because we want to know what you need to do, right, as a realtor. So 2017, right, we had the big Tubbs fire over in Santa Rosa. With that, more laws came out. We got Civil Code 1102.19. That outlines that it requires that the seller of any real property in a high or very high fire severity zone must have documentation that that property is in compliance with Public Resource Code 4291. And that went into effect starting July 1st of 2021. So here's a picture of the map. You'll see multiple different colors. The state is broken down into 3 zones. Who's financially responsible to suppress those fires? It's the federal government, state government, or local government. So we have that in our area. As you can see over here to the right, we have different colors within our map that you see identified as a high, very high, moderate fire severity zones. So depending on where your houses are located within those zones may require you to get the inspection completed. So when should you get an inspection? Right away. Okay. Fire. If you can get it before, that's even better. But right when you get into a listing, you should try to get that inspection done because we get busy. We have multiple houses that could be up for sale. That inspector may have vacation. He may be in a training. I mean, there's a lot of things that are going on. They may be required to go to a fire to do other assignments. So that may prolong that. So the sooner you can get them out there, the easier it is. Our goal is to be out there within 10 days. A lot of times they try to do that even quicker. Okay. Another good reason why to get that inspection done started sooner than later is if there is a violation that needs to be corrected, that allows you time to get that corrected before you close the escrow. So with that, you guys may or may not, but you saw over there, there's some papers over here. Anybody get that? That is the actual inspection form, a sample that the inspectors are going to look at. So as you can look within there, there's the different bullets, A, B, C, all the way down to 0 or O, all identifies the things that we are going to be looking at. So that you can use that tool as a way to help your clients to help prepare for that inspection to hopefully make sure that they've completed all those tasks. So how do you request an inspection? If you go to www.fire.ca.gov/dspace. So once you go to that website, this is what you'll see. This will pop you up on the CAL FIRE's Defensible Space website. You'll see the big yellow box there, request a real estate inspection. Just click on that. This will take you to the next page. It will look just like this. And at the very top, you'll see fire hazard severity zones. Click on that button, and then that will lead you to navigate you some questions to start that process. If you live in any of these lower counties, Marin County, or if the property being sold is in Marin County, LA County, Orange County, Santa Barbara County, or Ventura County, click on the link down there, and that will direct you to their process. They are considered a contract county for the state. Okay. That will lead you into this map right here. If you go down there to the far left, you'll see a couple icons. You'll see something that looks like a binoculars. Go ahead and click that. That will pull up this address form over here. Type in the address within that property that you're selling, and it will zoom right into the map of where that's at. Go back. On this previous page, you'll see the legend over here, what zone they fall under, and you'll know whether or not you have to have a compliance inspection done. Who can request the inspection? I'm going to buy the house. Can I request that inspection? Right. So if I'm going to buy the house, I can't request an inspection because I'm not the owner. So the agent or the seller. Once you fill out that form and it takes you through there, it'll ask you like who's going to be present. Have somebody there. So if there's any types of corrections that need to be made, you can maybe do it right there. It might be something pretty minimal. So Civil Code 1102.19, it's the law that requires documentations that the property is in compliance and cannot be obtained by the close of escrow. The seller and the buyer can enter into a written agreement showing that the buyer agrees to obtain documentation of compliance within 1 year of close of escrow. So if you're not in compliance, they can still come into a written agreement within that. And you can find that in Civil Code 1102.19. You also want to make sure to see if that house is in compliance or prior to them doing the inspection. Click on the same www.fire.ca.gov/dspace. The bottom of the page, you'll see check your readiness. That will actually take you to a CAL FIRE assessment site. You can do that for your home, any home, right? And you can essentially take a survey and we'll walk you through the tools of what you can do or steps you can do to make your house a little more fire safe. Within that, you also find, figure out an area to set up your own personal evacuation plan or your client and help them know how to handle an emergency if one arises. Any questions? So you can only handle it up to your property land, right? Mm-hmm. So you can't go onto your neighbor's property. I have the same situation where I live. I wish we could take a couple of my neighbor's trees out, but they don't want to. But luckily I'm far enough away. I don't have to worry about it too much, but eventually they will fall, but just down on my house.
Because, buyers do ask that question.
Now that's something you also may have local ordinances that may be involved with that. And like I said, those local ordinances are different for every county or city. Like I know in the area where I live, there's a local ordinance that passed where you can go onto the neighbor's property in order to maintain that 100 feet of defensible space.
Oh, okay.
So in some areas they have passed those.
Costly, right?
What's that?
It's costly for sure.
It could be,
Yeah.
depending on what's growing, what size of trees, or is it grass?
Well, like
Just real quick, ladies and gentlemen, if you have a question, please grab the microphone so that all of the folks on Zoom, I think we've got a couple hundred people on Zoom, can hear the question, just talking to the microphone there.
okay, I know like in Nevada County, we have an office up there, and Nevada County's adopted an ordinance that if you as a neighbor complain about your neighbor's trees, that they'll go out and make the property owner adjacent to your house, clear those trees up because they're a defensible space problem, which causes, an issue for a neighbor that has trees.
Mm-hmm.
So it's getting to be a real big problem in the rural areas because counties adopt these ordinances and people don't know about them until they go to sell. And a really big issue. And it's very costly right now to get trees cleaned up. And you can spend $20,000-$30,000 really easily. So
Mhm. Yeah, it looks like we got a question over here.
Hi, some counties or jurisdictions have ordinances for like wildlife habitat protection and things like that that could be in conflict with defensible space ordinances. How do you reconcile, or what takes priority?
Is there any examples?
El Dorado County,
Eldorado County.
And what's,
oak. El Dorado County has an oak management plan. For example, so, and I'm not that familiar with it, but it preserves oak canopy and size of tree. So what do you do if that's, in conflict on a country property?
so I'm not a lawyer, so I can't speak exactly on that. But a lot of the times those local ordinances, that may be a local ordinance, and I don't know for that one for sure. You may be able to still limb the tree up. You may be able to still remove them. Maybe some of them can be removed. Remember, defensible space is not a clear cut, knock every tree down. Okay, so within this handout, and also you can go like within the questions, defensible space is reducing those fuels, taking out the dead and dying, having separation between brush. You don't want the brush right up to your house, right? So we're not talking about clear cutting trees, thinning trees, possibly limbing trees, those types of natures. Because if we removed all the trees, honestly, you'd have an erosion problem. You could have mudslides and all that stuff. So we need the trees in the ground. We just need to have it more of a manageable appearance.
I'm just wondering about, you just commented that a buyer might have up to a year to come into compliance, but on the insurance end of things, I'm just wondering how that aligns, because I feel like a lot of the insurance companies are saying you have 60 days, up to 60 days that they might go by the property to see if there's any issues before they potentially drop you from the insurance. So can you speak to that? Because I feel like that's in conflict.
Yeah, the insurance companies aren't really in line with anything. They just don't want to be in California for the time being.
Yeah.
We'll go over that in more detail, but yeah, there's not really logic on the insurance side of things right now. It's a macro approach at reducing their footprint on the whole state until they get the rate increases they want. So yeah.
And I feel like that's the perfect segue to get into insurance. So let's give Randy a big round of applause. Thank you, Randy. Again, we're going to have time at the end to ask more questions. So if you have more questions for Randy or for Scott at the end of this, just save them for the end of our time together. Okay, so we've got Scott Sanchez here, who is the insurance expert, 15 years in the business. And we're going to have a conversation with Scott because, like he mentioned, there's some things happening in the insurance space. Specifically, you can read headlines and companies are quote unquote pulling out of the state of California. I know there's more to that, and we'll ask you specifics there. But let's just start with that, Scott. Like, what's kind of the current state of insurance in the state of California?
It's bad.
Okay, and the next topic is no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, so as probably a lot of you have seen, back in the summer, we had some big companies pull out, like State Farm, Allstate, Nationwide. Actually, Nationwide, ironic to their name, pulled out nationwide. They're really struggling. And then there were kind of some smaller companies that tried to stay on, ended up pulling out after that. And then last week, we saw kind of the mid-sized companies pull out. Essentially what's going on right now in California is take the FAIR plan out, and we'll get to them because they're kind of their own thing. If you have a home and it doesn't matter the location, this is just all across California, the approval rate for a home insurance policy is under 10% right now. And so, as it stands today, you've got Mercury Insurance and AAA that are trying to stay open. Now, albeit they're being quite picky with what they're taking. USAA is staying open. And there's a couple small companies, like there's a company called Bamboo that's approving at a 10% rate. And a company called Dongbu that's approving a little bit. But outside of those five, there's really not much else going on. Mercury and AAA are staying open because they are California-based companies. And I just think for the optics, them shutting down would look really bad. And USAA kind of has their built-in filter for military only, to where they can kind of restrict how much business is coming in. And then a couple other companies being a little opportunistic. So yeah, it's really, really tough right now. And it's going to get better in terms of a further outlook. The state and the insurance companies are, having negotiations right now when they're going to open back up. And the target date is 12/1 of 2024. So that's, at least we have a date. So about 3 weeks ago, you might have said Newsom came out and gave a speech on the state of the insurance industry, and he was going to try and enact an executive action to revise Prop 103, which is the insurance regulatory law. I won't get too in the weeds there. A consumer advocacy group basically came out and said he cannot do that. So we're going to have to go through a process before that gets revised. And until it gets revised, we're not going to see the insurance companies come back in. And so that'll probably be the end of next year. Simultaneously, they're negotiating moving policies off of the FAIR plan back onto the traditional insurance companies. They're at about 15% right now that they've agreed upon that the insurance companies will take. And hopefully by December, when the laws get revised, the negotiations between the FAIR plan and the insurance companies will come to terms. So we'll see a mass opening at the end of next year, beginning of 2025, where the insurance market will return to a healthy norm. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
So obviously we're here today to, talk about AB 38, the fire disclosure law that took, effect in July of 2021. But all of this weaves together, right? It's the increase of natural disaster and wildfires that are now affecting the insurance space. And then, of course, it's creating new disclosures and forms for us as real estate agents to have to fill out and navigate with our clients that we're serving today. So all of this kind of weaves together. Back to the insurance piece here for just a moment, Scott. So what happens, right? So we hear that companies are pulling out, but really what that means is they're just not writing new policies. Is that correct? Just a point of clarification. It's not that they're canceling all of their existing policies specifically. It's just they're not issuing the new policy to clients that are requesting property insurance.
Right. And they're keeping what the business they're writing, that 10% approval rate is just above the non-renewal rate. So we're seeing about 8% of policies being non-renewed. So they're just writing enough policies to stay above that line. So the state doesn't enter an official moratorium, which the last time we had a home insurance moratorium was after the Northridge earthquake in the 90s, where the insurance industry shut down until the California Earthquake Authority was set up. And so we haven't entered official moratorium. Everyone I'm talking to doesn't seem to think we're going to go there. I seem to think we are. I don't know. Everyone I said, I'm like, are we entering a moratorium? And everyone I talked to says, no, that's not going to happen. I don't know how we don't at this point. I don't know how just having a handful of companies staying open is going to be sustainable for the next 14 months. And so my guess is, and I'm speculating a bit, but that there's going to be a new business moratorium, meaning no new policies, but would also mean a non-renewal moratorium as well. And that's across the whole state. As far as what you're talking about with the companies pulling out, yeah, they just don't want to write new policies. And we'll go into a little bit more of that, but they're being instructed by the insurance companies we deal with are being instructed by the insurance companies above them to not take on any more new business. And so they're going to keep their policies in place. They're going to use AI predictive modeling to identify 5 to 10% of their book of business that could be problematic and try to get off of that over the next year and then not take on new policies. So,
okay. So I think, logically, I can follow the path of understanding that, hey, they're not going to write new policies in some of the areas that present high risk or risky insurance scenarios, like the wildfire areas and the mountainous areas that we've been kind of talking about specifically today. But it's also my understanding that even some properties that have prior claims are also being turned down for insurance. Is that kind of something you can speak to?
Yeah, well, and when a home has one claim, there's a good chance there's going to be another claim in the next 5 years. So, and it depends on the area too. So as an example, take a non-weather water loss in Folsom, non-weather water being like a pipe breaking or something like that. That is pretty much, that's going to take that home out of the insurance market completely, because I don't know if you guys have heard what's going on in Folsom, what they did with the water filtration. They put some chemicals in it. Turns out it eats away at the copper piping. And so if you have, there's a lot going on there. Anyways, I won't go into all that, but if you have one claim there where your pipe breaks, you're probably going to have another, right? So they're looking at it, and there's a lot of scenarios. So then when it happened in Folsom, they said, well, we're going to send all this water to Orangevale then, because it took 10 years. And so then it started happening in Orangevale. Anyway, so yes, it's not just the fire issue. There's specific issues. You know, they'll also look at a younger person. If you have a homeowner in their 20s and they have a claim, people in their 20s normally don't take care of their stuff. So they're going to look at age and factor that in, right? And so they're taking a very, they're really going in depth here in California because there's a lot of money to be made here. But the flip side is, you know, when you're not underwriting your policies correctly, there's a lot of money that can be lost very quickly too. So.
Do we have the Tech person here today as well to kind of tie this all? No, I'm just kidding. All right, let's keep it rolling here. Okay, so let's just say for a minute that, you know, I'm representing a buyer. I get their offer accepted. Everyone's all excited, and then we find out we can't get insurance. What happens next?
Yeah, so there is still the California FAIR Plan, which is not a state-run organization as some people think. It is a privately owned company that is owned by all the insurance companies that operate in California. So basically, if let's just say State Farm has 20% of the insurance market in California, they get 20% of the profits for the FAIR Plan or have to pay 20% of the deficit with them, right? So that it's a privately owned company. The CEO is a former Farmers executive, and they will take anyone. Well, I should preface it. There are some homes that there's just nothing we can do, you know, but they approve about 99% of the homes. So the FAIR Plan is an option. It is not a great option because it only covers for fire, wind, and hail. So it will satisfy the lender. But it will, you know, it's not going to cover for liability or water losses, things like that. So I've seen some cases where we get to the end of this home deal and the FAIR Plan's the only option left, you know, and sometimes that'll scare off a buyer. And just kind of what I tell my clients, at least, is it's a temporary solution that the market will open up. If you really, you know, it's like someone kind of getting scared by a high interest rate. You say, well, the interest rates will go down and you can refinance in a year. It's sort of the same thing with the insurance, right? It's a last ditch effort. You have to go there. You're only going to have them temporarily. And yeah, it's not a great plan. It's actually pretty cheap, especially in the kind of suburban areas. So if you have to go that route, it's fine. And with the FAIR Plan, it's pretty simple. It's a 1 to 2 day turnaround time. All you have to do is get a photo of the front of the house, including a clear shot of the roof and a photo of the street number, and the insurance agent can put it through for you. What I get a lot of times is, you know, because usually you would get, as an agent, I would just get that photo from the buyer or from the homeowner, but obviously don't own the home yet. So would be weird if they went out there to get the photo, right? So usually I ask the realtor to get them. And the thing I get all the time is they'll say, oh, well, it's in the appraisal, and the appraisal photos almost never work. So when you're out there, you know, if you just want it for this, that you're already there, get a photo of the front of the home and the street number. I have a feeling there's going to be a lot more of these FAIR Plan policies going through all over, not even just the high fire risk areas, all over. I had to do a FAIR Plan yesterday in Sacramento, 95826, and it's happening. So just go ahead and get those photos, because that's probably where a lot of business is going to be going over the next year.
Yeah, I think the thing to highlight here today, right, is that the insurance challenge is not just, you know, isolated to the high risk areas, the wildfire areas. I mean, it's happening in the urban markets as well, where we're having pre-existing claims or a previous claim on a property. So I think for us, as the everyday practitioner in real estate transaction, if we're representing a seller and we see that there was a prior claim, right, on the TDS or the SBQ, or we're representing buyer and we get a copy of the disclosures and see that there was a prior claim, it might be a good idea for us to quickly jump into, can we get insurance mode, and talk to our trusted insurance advisor, see if they can find a carrier that will insure the property. And if not, you know, have the time to walk through that process with the FAIR Plan as the last resort type of insurance policy on that property. Anything else to add there, Scott?
Yeah, and I would just say, like I mentioned, those companies that are open, you know, there's a few other Travelers, a little bit, you know, Safeco, if you can find an agent that's still appointed. They've unappointed about 90% of their agents in California, but there are some companies that are still open if you're willing to bundle the auto. I mean, there are options, but just get started quickly, you know. And like I said, AAA, I have found, I don't represent AAA, so this isn't, you know, I'm not trying to promote anything. I've just said that they've been more open than most, because they have huge rate increases coming, right? And they know that they're going to write these policies and kind of bait and switch next year. But hey, for a lot of people, there's really no other option. So I would recommend, if you can get friendly with a AAA agent. I have a friend of mine that works at the Folsom branch, been there 43 years, and she's writing more business than she's ever written. And so if you just call the general AAA number, you might not get someone back. So, just start early, look at AAA, look at Mercury, you're going to have to call around. And, like I said, that person with the FAIR plan yesterday that I wrote up in Sacramento, she's a lender. And so she knows a lot of people. She had been searching for 2 months before she got to me. And, that was all that we could do. So just get started early on these,
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. I'm just thinking, man, we do a lot of stuff before we actually take care of the client in an escrow, right? I mean, think about all that stuff. I mean, you think about just the average listing. It's like, okay, we got to go in, help guide them, clean it up, get the photos, stage the property, spread the bark, do the landscape, do all that stuff. But not to mention, we need to call CAL FIRE, check on insurance, check the pest inspection, do all of these things. So, when a client questions our value, I think that things like this and what we're doing today helps illuminate the value that we are bringing to today's consumer. They need us, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, yeah, let's give it up. I like that. Round of applause. Thank you for that. No, but they need us. Was there a question? I'm sorry. Oh, you have a question. Okay, perfect. We got the mic. Go ahead.
So I am a AAA insured person.
Mhm.
And we have one in the fire area
Mhm.
that we went to go do the FAIR plan. This is why I'm just bringing this up. They wouldn't write the wraparound liability on it. So maybe you might want to just redo that.
Well, they're restrictive, but they're the most open.
Okay.
Yeah, no. I mean, they're not. I mean, they have the opportunity to be picky, but the reason they're the most open, I mean, they've got 65% coming down on auto insurance and probably over 50% on home. So they're willing to take, and I don't know how they got it approved, honestly. The other companies can't do it. So they're more open,
Okay.
but it's just as time goes on and as more companies close down, they've even got more restrictive in just the past 2 weeks, so next week they could close down,
Well, that's true. And
Yeah.
I've been a member with them for 40 years. So,
Yeah.
and they won't write liability wrapped around the CAL FIRE. So I have to go somewhere else. So I may be talking to you after
Let me know. We can help. Yeah.
Excellent. All right, let's give Scott a big round of applause. Thank you for your time here today. Again, we're going to have time for Q&A if you have more questions specific here to the insurance piece. But let's flip over to Jana from the California Association of Realtors. There you are, Jana. How are you today?
Doing well, thank you. How are
Hey,
you?
you can't see us, but we can see you.
I can see you. I got you
Oh,
on
you
my
can
screen,
see
so
us.
I'm good.
Hi,
Yeah.
everybody wave to Jana. All right, wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so we wanted to also now kind of, again, bringing this all together as the everyday real estate agent in transaction, in our practice, we have forms. And we got a whole lot of forms to remember. And sometimes those forms can be tricky. Sometimes they're complicated. Sometimes there's so many questions on the form that it causes your client to ask you questions. And then you're stuck kind of trying to navigate, how do I answer this? Am I crossing a line? Am I not? I want to be the resource, but I don't want to give too much. I don't want to get sued. What do I do? So we brought in Jana from the California Association of Realtors to help us help walk us through the fire hardening and defensible space disclosure and addendum. Again, this is the new addendum that basically was put in place right around the time the laws were changing in July of 2021. And then in this disclosure and in this addendum, there's a few requirements that have to be met. So this isn't for every transaction. So let's start there, Jana. What types of transactions would require this particular disclosure and addendum?
Right. So this disclosure, this form is required on transactions where it's a residential 1 to 4 unit property. So one unit to 4 units, and 1 unit does include condos, townhouses, things like that. So 1 to 4 units when the property is located in one of those high or very high fire hazard severity zones. So you're familiar with residential 1 to 4 unit for sort of figuring out your standard disclosures. Then on top of that, if it's in one of those high or very high fire zones, that's when this FHDS form is going to need to be included as well.
Does a property also have to be built pre-2010, or maybe you said that? Did I miss that?
That's sort of a sub issue, right? So there's 2 aspects. The FHDS form covers 2 things. It covers the fire hardening requirements and the defensible space requirements. The fire hardening portion only has to be filled out for properties constructed prior to 2010. So if it's built after 2010, you can skip paragraph 2 of the form. That's the fire hardening portion. But for the defensible space portion, because like Randy explained, defensible space isn't, fire hardening has to do with the structure itself, but defensible space is the area around the structure. So it doesn't matter you're built for that. that portion needs to be filled out for any one of those properties in a fire zone.
Perfect. Okay, so an important thing to highlight on that form, right? It's kind of segmented out into two different categories. You've got fire hardening disclosure and then the defensible space piece disclosure and addendum as well. So are there any exemptions to completing this form, Jana?
There are a few. So also, like Randy mentioned, these laws are part of Civil Code Section 1102. So home hardening is 1102.6F, defensible space is 1102.19. Civil Code Section 1102 is the TDS law, the Transfer Disclosure Statement law. So these are under that umbrella. So the same exemptions that apply to a TDS, you're probably familiar, you've encountered sellers who are TDS exempt. Those same sellers would be exempt from filling out this form as well. So that's going to be REO transactions, bank-owned properties. That's going to be bankruptcy sales. It's going to be government entities. And then the two you're most likely to encounter, probate sales, where the seller's a probate administrator, or most trust sales, where the property is being sold by a trustee of a trust.
Okay, so Jenna, because this is a statutory requirement, meaning it's required by law, if I hear you correctly, it's falling under that TDS umbrella.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the scenario where the buyer maybe doesn't get a copy of this, or they get a copy of it after all of the disclosures have been signed and passed back and forth. And then, oh, I don't know, 22 days into it, they just drop this little beauty right on your lap in their transaction. So what's up with that? Can the buyer cancel?
Yeah, so that's a sort of great connection you made. I pointed out this is part of the TDS law. You probably also, many of you are familiar with the special rules that apply to the TDS, which include special cancellation rights for late delivery. That same right applies here. So if this disclosure is delivered late, or, you know, even after contingencies are removed, what the law says is the buyer has a statutory right, and this is also repeated in our contract in 11G, to cancel up to 5 days after delivery of the disclosure, assuming it's delivered electronically. 3 days if you hand it to them in person, doesn't happen too often. So typically they're going to have a 5-day window where they could cancel after receiving this form, even if it's not, you know, even if contingency has been waived. And the other thing I'll mention too is unique to this because it's a disclosure and addendum, right? So it's a home hardening disclosure and defensible space addendum. The other consequence of not delivering this form is, Renee talked about the option of, okay, seller can obtain compliance, or if that's not going to happen, buyer can agree in writing to obtain compliance. If the buyer doesn't get this form and sign it, they haven't agreed in writing to obtain compliance, and that obligation is going to default back to the seller. So there's a lot of important reasons to make sure this form gets delivered early and signed early and taken care of.
All right. So quick question for the audience. Have you guys all seen this form? Read through it, read the questions, if this, then this, and if this, then that, or this, or that, and this, and that, right? Kind of like a decision tree. There's a decision tree as part of this as well to kind of help guide us through the filling out of this form. But let's just talk, because there is a lot in this form, Jana. Just kind of curious your take on, you know, what role should the agent play, right? So oftentimes as agents, we get asked questions. Well, I don't know if I'm in a local ordinance. Do you know? Are we in a local ordinance here in El Dorado County? Yes or no, Mr. or Mrs. Agent? What should the agent do and or say, and how to respond to help guide the client actually fill this out accurately?
Sure. So you're right. It's a huge struggle. You know, and I know it happens with all disclosures where the seller might lean on their agent. And I think everyone's very familiar with and comfortable saying to their client, when it comes to the TDS or SPQ, you have to fill this out. I can't fill it out for you. But this one's so much more complicated. But the rules are the same. You still aren't going to be answering the questions on behalf of your client or filling it out for them or even telling them how to respond or like what boxes to check, things like that. But you can give them guidance. You can point them to resources, provide them to resources. And it probably is going to be even more important to do that on a form like this than the other disclosures. The trickiest aspect of it, I have found, and I'm sure you have too, is that issue of, am I subject to a local ordinance? Because that's the one thing the seller just has to know. It's not, do you know if you're in a local ordinance? It's yes or no, is the property located in one? Some sellers know, depending on how, you know, I heard someone sort of mention the Nevada County ordinance, things like that. It might be high profile, they may know. Otherwise, like Randy was saying, really all you can do is suggest they contact the local city or county fire department. A lot of those city and county fire department have great websites that are really useful. or they may have to put a call in and just say, hey, I need to find out, is there a local ordinance that applies to my property?
Okay, thank you. And then another question here, just specific to answering of questions on
Mhm.
the form. So putting myself in the homeowner's position, and I've got to answer some questions. Specifically, I'm looking at the fire hardening vulnerabilities questions on the form.
Mhm.
What if I don't know? I mean, I don't even know what an eave soffit roof ventilation is, Jana, for
Right.
crying out loud. It says yes or no. What if I just don't know if I have those things?
Right. You don't know if there's a gap of more than 1/8 of an inch of the soffits on your
No
building. Yeah.
clue.
Yeah. It's a tough one. The good news about this section is this portion is set up just like most of our other disclosure forms, asking, are you seller aware of the vulnerabilities located on the property? So the seller does not have to climb on the roof with their measuring tape. They do not have to, go and figure this out. Now, some of these they may know the answer to. They probably know if the roof is made of wood shingles or shakes. They might know if they have single paned windows or if there's brush underneath the deck, things like that. But like we were saying, some of these, your average seller won't even know it's being asked. But that doesn't mean they leave it blank. That doesn't mean they write an I don't know. It says, seller, are you aware? So if they genuinely don't know, then they're not aware and they would check no.
Okay, wonderful. Let's just talk about some of the available resources, if you would, Jana, to help our agents help our clients when they have these questions. Specifically, we have the decision tree that you guys came out with a while back to kind of help answer some of these questions and guide the client through a series of questions and next questions if they answer certain ways and things like that.
Right.
So can you just kind of touch on those resources that we can give to our clients to help them fill this form out specifically?
Sure. Yeah. So that decision tree is kind of the big one. And, some people find it super useful. Some people don't. It's optional to be used. You can definitely suggest to your client my first suggestion is, I know the form is overwhelming and it's a lot of information because this law has a lot of moving parts. In my experience, I think if you just encourage them to really sort of read it step by step and think through each portion, that it might be less scary once they do that. But the decision tree is there as well. If they have, like I said, if their questions are about the local ordinance, point them in the direction of the local fire department. If the questions are about, say, hey, am I located in a high fire hazard severity zone? Because that comes up a lot too, right? And they might go to their agent and say, does this apply to me? Am I in this fire zone? NHD reports, that's where you're going to find the answer to that. And the NHD company, if it's, unclear, or if maybe they go to the map that Randy showed and looked in the fire zone, but you can always suggest you or they speak to the representative from the NHD company. They've got a lot of info about this. And one piece of actually good news I can share, if you haven't heard this yet, is the NHD report is being updated in the new year. So there was a new law that was passed, signed by the governor, to redo the language in the NHD report so that you can look at it and know definitely, am I in a fire zone? Am I subject to this law? So it's going to be starting in January 1st. The NHD report, NHD statement is going to look a little bit different. And it's going to say, is the property in a high or very high fire hazard severity zone subject to the laws that comprise AB 38? And it'll tell you exactly what zone you're in. So at least that portion will be a little bit easier starting next year.
Okay, and then the last question, Jana, let's just say that the property is not in a high or very high fire zone. However, you show up at this property and there's all kinds of combustible materials laying around. Would you recommend that the seller still complete, or that the agent recommend that the seller still complete this disclosure, even though they may be exempt because they're not sitting in a high or very high fire zone?
So great question. And for a while, for the first year or so that this form was in use, I know people were doing that. We were saying, yeah, go ahead. But because of the portion of this form that's an addendum and creates legal obligations to comply with certain laws, what we did is we took out all the advice and advisory language from this form and moved it to a form called the Wildfire Disaster Advisory. So WFDA, Wildfire Disaster Advisory. If you know that the property, like I said, not technically in a high fire zone, but unfortunately there's fire risk everywhere these days, that's the form I would recommend using to give to your buyer or seller client, but specifically the buyer, say, hey, there still could be a fire risk here, and here's some things you should be aware of.
Wonderful. Any questions from the audience before we let Jana go? Yes, right back there.
So I have a two-part question. One's for Jan and one's for Randy. So Jana, you mentioned the trusts, and that we know that those are typically, you don't have to fill out the TDS.
Right.
Specifically, what about the revocable trust where people have lived in it, put it in for tax purposes? I don't want to leave people with the wrong impression here. And then I want to bring it over to Randy and say, okay, if they're not required, because as an agent, we say, great, I don't have to deal with this. Randy, do you care if it's in a trust or an REO, or do your obligations still remain? So I'd like to start with Jana and then move to Randy on that.
Sure. And just to be clear before we even get to Randy, when we're talking about exemptions, we're talking about exemption from filling out our form, right? From completing this disclosure. I'm going to go ahead and guess that Randy's going to say everyone needs to be complying with fire safety laws. And also just, again, I always want to reiterate, which Randy said as well, if you live in one of these zones, you should be complying with defensible space all the time anyway. That's supposed to be the baseline. But as far as the exemption from filling out the FHDS form and providing this particular disclosure, you're right. There's a nuance why I said most trustees are exempt. Trustees are exempt, except if it's a revocable living trust where the trustee has lived in the property in the past year or previously owned the property outside of the trust. So in other words, if people put in the property in the trust for estate planning or tax purposes, but they still live in the property, they're going to be filling out the TDS and this disclosure and everything else as well.
Part two, over to Randy.
We also do a two-part approach. Okay, so our defensible space inspectors are doing defensible space inspections for these homes that are selling, but they also do defensible space inspections for the other homes as well. So as a statewide level, we plan on trying to inspect the homes. Our goal is every 3 years, but obviously incidents will dictate whether or not we can get that done or staffing levels. So while those inspectors are doing inspections for the sale of homes, when they're not doing that, they're doing inspections every day. They'll target areas. Every unit, we have 21 units throughout the state. They will target areas in which they feel here's our priority to try to get these houses done this year. So they're on a rotating block around that. So if we don't know, if you don't put in a request that this house is being sold, we don't monitor every house being sold. So, but our goal, like I said, is to try to have all the houses within the SRA inspected every 3 years.
Yeah, and sort of one thing I would add on to that, to his point, which is, let's say a seller is exempt from providing this form because it's a probate seller or something, or they're a trustee. But there's a chance that there has been an inspection anyway. Maybe they just were in one of those areas that CAL FIRE came through and did an inspection. So if they have an inspection report, they should still be providing that to a buyer if they have it, no matter what, whether or not they're actually filling out the FHDS form.
Perfect. Another question right up front here.
Can I piggyback on that real quick? Sure. So we have a database system in Sacramento. So I'll take a house in Nevada County because that's easy. They had the inspection done because the engine companies did the inspections 2 months ago, right? Once you put in that information and you start the process, we'll get that information to you and that will count. If it's been 7 months, you'll have to get a new inspection. So these inspections have to be done within 6 months.
So the question that I had is, if you have a buyer and you do recognize that the house is in a very higher risk of fire, and they're not providing the disclosure, and you as a buyer cannot ask for the inspection, can you still ask the seller to get the inspection done regardless of their disclosure?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, if you're buyer's agent and you're more on top of things than maybe in this case the seller or the listing agent is, absolutely. You can point out to them, hey, I noticed the property's in a fire zone. I would request / demand they provide you with the FHDS form. Like, Randy was saying, you can't contact the agency for an inspection, unfortunately, but you absolutely can make that request to the seller and point out to them, hey, we're in this fire zone. Please address this.
Question right back over there.
I was wondering, what about commercial real estate? We cover residential, but does any of this apply to commercial?
Not the laws we're talking about today. Randy might know if there's different laws for commercial properties or not.
No, like Janet had mentioned, a residential units 1 to 4 units.
Well, right up here.
Okay, I have a few different questions. So an REO, a bank-owned property, the banks do not need to fix or do anything for defensible space, correct?
Right, they're exempt, at least, well, they're supposed to be maintaining the property with defensible space anyway, but 1102.19 does not apply to an REO seller because they're exempt under that law.
Okay, but the rest of us need to comply, right?
Correct.
Okay. Secondly, does the defensible space inspection cost money to the seller or to anyone that's having one done?
Good question. I'm not sure. I
If
think
CAL
it,
FIRE is conducting the inspection, we do not charge.
Great.
Some local agencies, local government departments, some of them do charge.
And then on that same note, how many inspectors are there at each different location in order to provide this service?
So with that, like I said, the state is divided up into 21 different units. Each of those units have funding for 2 inspectors to handle the real estate transactions. Now, if for some reason they're on vacation, busy, for whatever reason, they still have other people that can conduct that, but their primary role is those 2. With that said, things, staffing, it's supply and demand. Some of those challenges can make it a little harder for them to get out there. I'll use Nevada Yuba Placer, for example, because I'm very familiar with them. The AB 38 inspector that they hired for that, he covers from North Lake Tahoe to Loma Rica and Dobbins. So that's 3 counties that he covers. Technically, they oversee Sutter County as well. There's just a little bit of houses maybe in the SRA in the Sutter County, so I won't really count them. But they also have to include up into the Downeyville area. So they have a pretty big area that just 2 people have to inspect. So that's why getting it early, because they do try to cluster the inspections up in an area. If they're going to go to Tahoe, they try to get as many inspections as they can in North Lake Tahoe. Same with Yuba County, but that's how big of an area just 2 of them cover. Now, I don't know for the other units exactly how they're broken on, but each of the counties will have 2 people, each of the units. So like Amador, El Dorado County, those 2 counties alone probably only have 2 people. From CAL FIRE. Right. So if it's a local ordinance, and maybe and I'll just use back to Nevada Yuba Placer again, Truckee. I don't know if they charge or not, but they may charge if it falls within their jurisdiction.
Okay, and then in addition to that, once the inspection is done, how long does that inspection last? Like, for instance, a pest inspection, you only have a few months after they're done that it's, the certification of it or whatever lasts. So is this the same thing? Like you go out and it's only worth like 6 months, a year? Do they need to have it done again in a year?
So as we talked about earlier, Civil Code 1102.19 outlines that the inspection needs to be completed within 6 months of the sale. I'll throw an example. If you put a house on the market, right, and it sets for 9 months, you're beyond that 6 month mark, you're going to have another. It's only good for 6 months. For, like I said a minute ago too, if the engine goes out there and does inspections, because they're doing the whole neighborhood, that's one of their target zones to get done. 3 months ago, they did it, right? It's still good for 3 more months. But if that house goes month 4, 5, 6 from the sale, then it's going to have to get another.
I've had the privilege of ordering lots of these inspections. I live up in Meadow Vista. Sometimes my sellers are able to take care of it, and sometimes they choose to have the buyer do it. How are you doing this auditing? When do you know when escrow closes to go out there and make sure that the buyer did what they were supposed to do?
So we are providing the inspection and how that works, whether or not they come in compliance. I'm gonna have to refer back to the real estate agent or the insurance.
Well, where does that form end up? Like on that form, nowhere on that form does it say when is close of escrow.
Mhm.
So in my mind, how are you even auditing this whole process?
We make sure that we get the inspections done.
Yeah.
So CAL FIRE, I'll take that back. We're keeping track of the houses that get inspections done. As far as the close, what happens if they don't comply within because you guys came into an agreement, right? We don't know if you came into an agreement. You may not even, some people may not even requested us to come out, right?
Right.
So, like I said, overall, all the houses within the state responsibility area, our target goal is to have all those inspected every 3 years.
So you're eventually going to get to it.
Well, and it's a rotation, right?
Mhm.
Like where I live in a populated area of about 5,000 homes in our community, and it's about every 3 to 5 years, they'll come out and inspect and educate the property owners and move forward.
But right now you don't have a system where, oh, this one closed on this date and this buyer has until this date, and then we'll go out there on that date and check it.
And that's not the way the laws are written. We get the inspections done. If it's not within the 12 months, I guess it goes back to the real estate law.
Don't look at me.
me.
Look at me.
I'll just chime in and say, I think what you're getting at is like, is there a database? Is there, okay, closing 12 months. That's like Randy's saying, no one's doing it. No one files the FHDS form. You're just doing it as part of the transaction. The buyer is aware in your example that they have this time period to take care of it. What happens if they don't? Well, eventually there will be an inspection and they will have to take care of it because like you said, CAL FIRE will come around. Or if it's a local agency, some local agencies do go through every year if they're a smaller agency or something like that. So it'll catch up with the buyer eventually, but no one's registering the FHDS form and then starting a 12-month clock in an official sense.
I'm going to chime in on that real quick too. I'm used as a real estate expert witness in cases. So for those that go, oh, they're not necessarily checking, that's great till there's a claim on that home and guess who's paying for it? The agent that didn't do their job.
All right, this question is for Scott. Scott, Randy had mentioned you have up to 1 year with a written agreement, buyer and seller, to have those items repaired. However, does this affect if it's not repaired? If the agreement states it'll be repaired within 12 months, how is your initial policy going to be affected without those repairs being completed initially?
Well, the insurance is going to do its own inspection pending new business. So that's going to happen in the first 60 days. And they're going to make their own determinations because they're going to care about different things than, they're looking at, potential liability concerns, raised concrete, and obviously the fire concerns as well. So they're just going to do their own thing. And then they'll decide if they want to retain you as a client, if they want to short-term cancel you, if they want to send a memo where if it's not completed, then they'll do a non-renewal. So they're going to do their own thing separate of, they don't really care about what's going on, on that front. They're just going to do their own thing. So.
The back.
I think we have time for about one more here.
Okay. One more question, then they'll be hanging around after for additional questions if you have them. Go ahead.
I guess I'm just wondering why it's 60 days post close of escrow that the insurance companies get to decide if they're really going to insure or not. Because, lenders require insurance and buyers make their purchase on the assumption that they're really going to be able to maintain that insurance. So it's really hard to say to a buyer, you're insured, we think we'll know within the next 60 days if that's really going to persist or not for you. And so as agents, we're trying to help guide these buyers. And I feel like that's a really big pitfall that we really don't have answers to. Do you have any explanation or feedback on that?
Yeah, I mean, I could go on for a little bit here. So the Prop 103 was voted in the mid 80s, which is the insurance law, if you will. And then after it got put in, the insurance commissioner who was elected thereafter put in another 80% of it. So 20% of it was voted on, 80% was put in by an elected official. And that basically determines, the insurance law is very black and white. So whatever the days are, when I'm saying 60 days, sometimes they send it out in the first week, sometimes it's a couple months, it's just, they're bound by the law, what they can and can't do. Right. And so they can, if they can get ahead of you on a certain amount of time, they can short-term cancel you. They can also do really whatever they want to the rate. I just had a client close on a home It was their son who bought his first home up in Shingle Springs. $2,000 was the FAIR Plan premium. FAIR Plan went out and inspected it. It's now $4,200, and it's paying full. So they're asking for that $2,200 now, and he has 30 days to come up with that. And the mother is not happy. And, I'm sitting there like, what do you want me to, it's the FAIR Plan. They can do whatever they want. It's not fair. So I would, what I did in that position was I just tell people up front, I say, when you're dealing with the FAIR Plan or any insurance company right now, we're not selling cars where we're just trying to sell as much as possible. It's very much a two-way street. And right now it feels like it's more, we have to do what the insurance companies want versus the insurance companies doing what we want. Right. And so, and then in 2025, when things open up like crazy, you're going to see all the commercials come back and we're here for you and all this junk. And, it's a weird business for sure. So right now we are at the mercy of the insurance companies. And so that's what it is.
You're in good hands. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's give our panelists a big round of applause. Thank you, Jana, Scott, Randy. Thank you guys for joining us today. Again, they'll be hanging around after if you got a couple more questions. But on behalf of the California Real Estate Brokers, we thank you guys for joining us here at this educational seminar. We believe that hopefully you found some value and you can take that back to your clients and help guide the next transaction that you serve. Please. Quick reminder.
As a quick reminder, we are going to be sending a recording out to everybody of today's session. Also, a link to the PDF flyer that our battalion chief brought today. And CAL FIRE also has an 11-minute video covering this similar information. So please expect that on your email.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.